Picture this for a second. You've been through the medical ringer. You've had the crisis. You've got the diagnosis, adrenal insufficiency. You're taking your hydrocortisone or your prednisone religiously. You check your blood pressure. You go to the endocrinologist, and they look at your chart and say, "Great news. Your labs look stable. You're doing fine." And technically, you are. You aren't dying. You aren't in the hospital. But you walk out to the parking lot, sit in your car, and you just feel hollow. Not sad exactly, just blank. Like the engine is running, but the car is in neutral. You have energy to move, maybe, but no drive to actually go anywhere. And when you try to explain this to people, they just say, well, you're recovering, or maybe you're just depressed. But what if it's not depression? What if the standard treatment for adrenal insufficiency is actually leaving a massive biological hole in your system that almost nobody talks about?
That is the exact question we are tackling today, because for decades, the medical model has been about survival, keeping patients alive, and we're very good at that. But we are starting to realize that alive and fully functional are two very different physiological states.
Exactly. Today we're doing a deep dive into the My Adrenal Life article titled Androgens, DHEA, and What We Don't Replace in Adrenal Insufficiency. And Alex, this feels like one of those topics that is a huge blind spot in the medical community.
It is a massive blind spot, and it stems from how we view the adrenal glands. Most people, even many doctors, think of the adrenals as just stress hormone factories. They pump out cortisol, they keep your blood pressure up, they handle fight or flight. And that is true. But the adrenal gland is actually like a three-layer cake. It has different zones producing different things.
Okay, I like the cake analogy. Break down the layers for us.
So the outer layer produces aldosterone that handles your salt and water balance. If you have primary adrenal insufficiency, or Addison's, that layer is usually destroyed, so you take fludrocortisone to replace it. The middle layer produces cortisol. That's the fuel, the life-sustaining stress hormone. We replace that with hydrocortisone or prednisone. Without it, you die. It's that simple.
Right. That's the standard treatment package. Steroids and salt.
Precisely. But there is a third layer, the innermost layer called the zona reticularis, and this layer is responsible for producing adrenal androgens, specifically DHEA and DHEA-S. And here is the kicker. In standard adrenal insufficiency protocols, we almost never replace this. We just let that part of the factory stay broken.
So we are fixing the salt, we are fixing the cortisol, but we are completely ignoring this third component. Why? Is DHEA just not that important?
That was the prevailing wisdom for a long time. The thinking was, DHEA is a weak androgen. It's a precursor. Your body converts it into testosterone or estrogen, sure, but if your gonads, your ovaries or testes, are working, do you really need the adrenal contribution? The medical consensus was, probably not essential for survival.
And that's the key phrase again, essential for survival. But patients aren't just trying to survive.
Exactly. And this is where the article and the emerging science really challenges the status quo. Because DHEA isn't just raw material for making other hormones. It is what we call a neurosteroid.
Neurosteroid? That sounds like it's acting directly on the brain.
It is. We used to think DHEA just floated around waiting to be turned into testosterone, but we now know DHEA crosses the blood-brain barrier. It interacts with receptors in the brain, specifically GABA and NMDA receptors, which are involved in mood regulation, memory, and that feeling of emotional resilience.
So when a patient says, I feel flat or I feel disconnected, that's not just them being tired from the disease. That could be a literal chemical deficiency in their brain.
Spot on. The article describes it perfectly. It's not always depression. Depression has a specific clinical presentation, sadness, hopelessness. This is different. Patients describe it as a loss of oomph, a loss of drive. It's the difference between having fuel in the tank, which is cortisol, and having a spark plug to ignite it. DHEA seems to be part of that ignition system. It's about motivation and reward pathways.
That is such a validating distinction for people listening who might be feeling this. I want to talk about who this affects most, because the article mentions a gender difference here. Is this hitting women harder than men?
It generally does, yes. And that comes down to basic physiology. In men, the testes produce a huge amount of testosterone. So even if their adrenals stop making DHEA, they still have a massive reservoir of androgens coming from the testes. They might miss the neurosteroid effects, but they aren't totally androgen depleted.
But for women,
For women, the adrenal glands are a major source of androgen production. Depending on the phase of life, the adrenals can provide up to 50% or even more of the precursors for sex hormones. So if a woman develops Addison's disease, primary adrenal insufficiency, she goes from having normal androgen levels to basically zero almost overnight.
wow, so it's like a cliff edge.
It is a hormonal crash, and the symptoms track with that. We see a significant drop in libido, that is one of the most common complaints, but also muscle weakness, slower recovery after exercise, and that mental fog we talked about. It's a systemic loss of anabolic or building energy.
I want to clarify something for the listeners because adrenal insufficiency is complicated. We have primary, secondary, tertiary. Does this DHEA gap happen to everyone?
That is a crucial nuance. Let's break it down. In primary AI, Addison's, the adrenal cortex is destroyed, usually by antibodies, so the factory is burned down. You get no cortisol, no aldosterone, and no DHEA. It's a total wipeout.
Okay, so PAI patients are definitely missing it.
Definitely. Now, secondary and tertiary AI are different. These are issues with the pituitary or hypothalamus, the control centers. They aren't sending the signal, the ACTH, to the adrenals. Now, here is the interesting thing. ACTH is the main stimulator for both cortisol and DHEA production.
So if the signal is low,
Then the production is low. So in secondary AI, the adrenal glands are physically intact. The factory is fine. But the workers are on strike because nobody told them to work. So these patients often have very low DHEA as well. And this includes people with steroid-induced adrenal insufficiency. If you've been on high-dose prednisone for asthma or arthritis and your adrenals have gone to sleep, you likely have suppressed DHEA too.
this is blowing my mind a little bit because I feel like when people talk about steroid tapering or recovery, they only talk about the cortisol number. Is your cortisol coming back? No one asks, is your DHEA coming back?
And they should, because sometimes the cortisol recovers before the DHEA does. The zona fasciculata, the cortisol layer, might wake up, but the zona reticularis, the DHEA layer, can lag behind. This creates a fascinating and frustrating window where a doctor says, "Hey, you're cured. Your cortisol is normal." And the patient says, "I still feel terrible."
And the doctor probably thinks the patient is just anxious or reluctant to stop treatment.
Right, but chemically, they are still operating with a flat tire. They have the cortisol to handle stress, but they lack the DHEA to buffer that stress or provide the sense of well-being.
So, if this is so clear, if the mechanism is understood and the symptoms are real, why isn't DHEA replacement standard? Why doesn't every Addisonian walk out of the pharmacy with hydrocortisone, fludrocortisone, and DHEA?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, and the answer is messy. It's a mix of weak data, fear of side effects, and the difficulty of dosing. First, the data. There have been studies, several of them, on DHEA replacement in AI, and the results are mixed.
Mixed how? Like it doesn't work?
It works for some things, but not consistently for everyone. Some studies showed significant improvements in mood and libido, particularly in women. Others showed basically no change compared to placebo. It's notoriously hard to measure
quality of life in a clinical trial. It's subjective. So because we don't have a slam dunk study saying this prevents heart attacks or this stops death, the medical guidelines are conservative.
And I assume there are side effects, because we are talking about an androgen, a sex hormone precursor.
Yes, and this is the other barrier. If you give a woman DHEA, her body converts some of it to testosterone. If the dose is too high, you get androgenic side effects. Greasy skin, acne, facial hair growth, hirsutism, sometimes even voice deepening if the dose is massive, though that's rare with replacement doses.
Okay, so it's a tightrope walk. You want enough to get the brain benefits and the energy, but not so much that you're dealing with acne and hair growth.
Exactly. And unlike hydrocortisone, where we have decades of knowing exactly how much keeps you alive, DHEA dosing is an art. The Endocrine Society actually updated their guidelines in 2016 to address this. They basically said, look, we don't recommend this for everyone, but if a woman with primary adrenal insufficiency has low libido and low energy despite optimized standard treatment, you can consider a trial of DHEA.
So it's an option, but you usually have to ask for it.
You almost always have to ask for it, and you have to be monitored. You can't just buy it at the supplement store. Well, technically in the U.S. you can, because DHEA is sold over the counter, which is terrifying to most endocrinologists, but you shouldn't. You need pharmaceutical grade, if possible, or at least a vetted source, and you need blood tests to ensure you aren't overdosing.
That's a really important point. The article mentions that normal range isn't personal. Can you unpack that? Because I feel like that applies to so much of chronic illness.
Oh, absolutely. It's the bell curve trap. Lab ranges are built on population averages. If you take 100 healthy people, the range covers 95 of them. But let's say your personal normal for DHEA before you got sick was at the very top of the range. You were a high-energy, high-drive person. Now you get sick and your levels drop to the very bottom of the range. Technically, you are in range. You are normal. But for your body, you are running at 10% capacity.
And the doctor sees the green check mark on the computer screen and moves on.
Right. But your brain is screaming that something is missing. This is why the article emphasizes that hormones work as a system. DHEA balances cortisol. Cortisol breaks things down, catabolism. Androgens build things up, anabolic. If you only replace the breaker-downer and not the builder-upper, you are in a constant state of catabolism. You're wearing out.
That balance concept is huge. It explains why people feel physically weak, even if their muscles aren't wasting away clearly. They just don't have the repair signaling.
And remember the stress buffering. In a healthy person, under stress, both cortisol and DHEA spike. DHEA is thought to protect the brain from the toxic effects of too much cortisol. In a patient with AI taking hydrocortisone, they get the cortisol spike if they updose or take their meds, but they never get the DHEA spike. They are getting all the stress signal with none of the neuroprotection.
It makes so much sense why patients describe feeling brittle, like they can handle one thing, but if two things go wrong, they crumble. They don't have the buffer.
Brittle is the perfect word for it. And sadly, medicine is often binary, dead or alive, sick or cured. We aren't great at treating brittle.
So let's get practical for the listeners. Someone is listening to this, nodding along, thinking, this is me. I have the flat mood, the lack of drive, the muscle weakness. What do they do? Do they just start popping pills?
Please do not just start popping pills, especially with hormones. Here is the roadmap. First, optimize your basics. Many people feel terrible because their cortisol dosing is wrong, too much, too little, or timed poorly, or their fludrocortisone is off. Fix that first. DHEA is the cherry on top, not the cake.
Okay, basics first. Then,
if you are still symptomatic, especially if you are a woman with low libido or that characteristic flatness, talk to your endocrinologist about a trial. The key word is trial. You try it for 3 to 6 months. Standard starting doses for women are usually low, around 25 milligrams, sometimes even less. For men, it might be higher. But again, men often need testosterone replacement, not DHEA replacement. So it's different.
And what should they be looking for during that trial?
You monitor symptoms and side effects. Are you getting acne? Is your hair thinning? Then the dose is too high. Do you feel a return of morning motivation? Is your skin less dry? That's a common benefit. DHEA regulates sebum production, and many AI patients have incredibly dry skin.
Dry skin. That makes sense if it regulates sebum.
It's a huge quality of life issue. If your skin is cracking and bleeding, that matters. But the most important thing is managing expectations. DHEA is not a miracle cure. It won't give you the energy of an 18-year-old athlete. But for many, it turns the volume of life back up from a 3 to a 6 or 7. And that is significant.
It reminds me of the section in the article titled Gentle Perspective. It validates that it's okay to notice these patterns. It's okay to feel like something is missing, even if the doctor says you're fine. That psychological validation is almost as important as the hormone itself.
It is. Adrenal insufficiency is an invisible illness. You look fine. Your labs look fine. But you are manually operating a system that is supposed to be automatic. That is exhausting. Acknowledging that there are parts of the system we aren't fixing helps patients stop gaslighting themselves. It's not a character flaw that you're tired. It's a missing chemical.
I want to touch on one last thing before we wrap up. The future. Is there any move toward better replacement, or are we stuck with this piecemeal approach?
There is hope, but it's slow. There's research into delayed release hydrocortisone to better mimic natural rhythms, and there is more awareness around DHEA now than there was 10 years ago. The European guidelines are often a bit ahead of the US in recognizing quality of life metrics. But ultimately, we need more studies on long-term outcomes. We need to know, does DHEA replacement protect bone density in AI patients? Does it protect the heart? We suspect it might, but we need the data to make it standard of care.
Until then, we have to be our own advocates.
Always. Educated advocacy is the most powerful tool you have. If you go to your doctor and say, I read the Endocrine Society guidelines on DHEA for women with low libido in PAI, and I'd like to discuss a screened trial, that is a very different conversation than saying, I'm tired, fix me.
Knowledge is power. Alex, thank you for breaking down the complex chemistry of the missing hormone.
My pleasure. It's a vital piece of the puzzle.
And for everyone listening, if you've been feeling that hollow, flat sensation despite your good labs, take a breath. You aren't imagining it. Your factory might just be missing a shift. If you found this deep dive helpful, or if you know someone navigating the confusing world of adrenal insufficiency, send this episode their way. It might be the validation they've been waiting for.